We were discussing a very interesting case study about the carbon tax, how carbon tax impacts trade, and we had taken a case study of Indian trade with the Europe, especially about the two energy intensive products, steel and aluminium, and we had discussed how the carbon border adjustment mechanism liability is calculated. So this is a tax we need to understand. Now this tax is not actually paid by the exporters. They do not directly pay the carbon tax at the European Union border. The European Union importer has to register under carbon border adjustment mechanism. The European importer has to calculate the emissions and the European importer has to buy the CBAM certificates. Now, though we might feel that it is the importer which is leaving the cost, which is bearing the cost, but in reality, the cost is passed on to the Indian exporters. So, in order to get the profit, the European Union importers would demand lower prices to cover the CBM cost. This means that the Indian producers would earn less, they would face tougher contracts, and they would lose the bargaining power. The second thing is we need to understand how much they are going to impact by taking the actual numbers. So the typical production cost is 600 euros, right, for 1 ton of steel. So 1 ton of steel by using a specific technology. This technology I have taken as the blast furnace basic oxygen furnace route technology, which is based on coal as the primary fuel. This technology, if you use for production of 1 ton of steel, the carbon accounting shows that about 2.4 tons of carbon emissions are generated. And if you take that 2.4 tons of carbon dioxide generated and multiply it with European Union carbon price, that comes to about 192 euros per ton of the steel which is being produced. If the production cost is 600 euros per ton, if you add that, that comes to around 800 euros per ton. Now, of this, not entire amount is borne by the exporter. Partially, the exporters would take some loss and the importers would take a loss. So, as per the numbers which are available, you see that about 95 euros to 133 euros is the loss which has been reported per ton for the exporters, and the new sale price is reflecting this about 20% marginal loss. So this numbers clearly explains how the carbon trade impacts the market, how the carbon tax impacts the trade, how the CBAM hits the exporters of steel and aluminium, right, in the trade between India and European Union. Same would be true between any two groups where one group is the exporter and the other is the importer, and especially the exporter if it is using a fuel which is fossil fuel which is emitting carbon dioxide. Okay, so we need to understand that with these numbers the impact is a critical impact. That is why I named this slide as the critical impact, and these numbers would explain why the carbon border adjustment mechanism is going to hit the trade so hard. We need to understand that this CPEM is counting only the scope 1 and scope 2 emissions in the carbon accounting, and it does not count the entire emissions like mining, transport, product use emissions. So they have a specific methodology and factory level accounting system, and it would require precise measurements and requirements. However, the risk is if we are not able to quantify and report these things properly, it is going to adversely impact the producer and the exporter, and here is how the carbon accounting becomes very important.